Ian, when do you want me to start? Okay. Am I muted, Ian?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
You have the floor.
All right. Thank you so very
So
much.
very much.
Good evening and welcome back to our April forum, JCPS and NAACP's Collaborated Community Forum. I am Michelle Patrick, the education chair of the Louisville branch NAACP. And my co-moderator is Mr. Ian Brandon. Before we begin, I would like that you keep your microphones muted. And this action will eliminate any background information that may cause disruption to the presenters. There will be a question and answer period at the end of the presentations. And in our efforts to make the form more viable, there is now an evaluation form. Evaluation link, evaluation form at the end of the presentation. Mr. Brandon will talk to you all about that link, and I'm gonna turn it over to him to do so at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another NAACP JCPS Community Forum. Again, my name is Ian Brandon, Satellite Office Supervisor, and I would like to take a moment to acknowledge any board members that may be present. Give me a moment, I will scan the room here. And as I'm scanning, I would also like to just reiterate what Ms. Patrick said. At the end of the forum, we will be providing a evaluation link. We love to hear your feedback on how we're doing and how we can improve. And for all the JCPS educators, I will have a sign-in sheet. I will input that link in the chat periodically throughout the forum. And as a reminder, this is community. So this is information-based. It's a positive, welcoming environment. And we ask that all participants keep that in mind when we get to the question and answer period. And I would also like to bring greetings on behalf of our chief, Dr. John Marshall, and I will allow him to say a few words. He's in the room.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again. This is about the third year we have partnered with the NAACP to do community conversations. I'm very excited about this, and I wanted to encourage everybody to listen, participate. Mr. Brandon, if I am correct, in anticipation for this, people have already sent in a lot of questions that you will go through. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to encourage everyone to participate, listen, and let's see what we can do to continue to improve outcomes for students. The colleague that is going to be doing a lot of the presenting is Dr. Tara Greenwell. I totally and truly believe in the work that she is ushering in. I stand steadfast in the fact that as public schools go, so will America, and that we are very, very serious about this work. So I just wanted to thank you all for this. Again, thanking Dr. Greenwell and her team for those being on here as we talk about the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of school, which is curriculum and leadership and all those fun things. So thank you all for this. Appreciate it. And major thanks to the NAACP for being a continued partner with Jefferson County Public Schools and JCPS Diversity, Equity, and Poverty Department.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall. At this time, I will turn it back over to Ms. Patrick.
Thank you both. And I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, and that is Dr. Tara Greenwell. Dr. Tara Greenwell has been with JCPS for her entire career, serving as a teacher, an academic instructional coach, an assistant principal, and a principal. Most recently, she served as the executive administrator of Middle School Explore. Through her leadership, Explore expanded from a pilot program to a successful innovative experience at 8 middle school district-wide. Explore allows middle school students to discover their aptitudes and interests early on while becoming engaged academically. Currently, Dr. Greenwell has been named the Chief Academic Officer for JCPS. Dr. Greenwell is a respected leader with a strong background in education, focusing on enhancing instruction, creating a positive cultural climate, and ensuring that all students receive a rigorous, engaging instruction tailored to their individual needs. Our second speaker will be Ms. Jessie Thompson, and Ms. Jessie Thompson is the supervisor for gifted and talented at the JCPS Advanced Program. This is Ms. Thompson's 3rd year in JCPS and her 21st year in education. Prior to coming to JCPS, Ms. Thompson has worked as a classroom teacher in Florida, a new teacher mentor, a gifted resource teacher, and led of the only all-day gifted school in Harrodsburg County. I believe this is Missouri. Ms. Thompson is passionate and about gifted education and ensuring that all students have equitable access to identification and services. We're so glad to have both of you here tonight to share your expertise with us. And we're going to start off with Dr. Greenwell.
Thank you so much. Let me get my screen ready here. Yeah, let's see, is it working? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. Great. I'm Tara Greenwell. Thank you for the introductions. Thank you, Dr. Marshall. It's been wonderful to really find a colleague that is willing to partner on big things and that sees equity and academics and all of those things as one. And thank you to Mr. Brandon and Ms. Patrick for the organization of this. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the power of rethinking education. I want to give you a snapshot of where we are when it comes to literacy and also curriculum, and then just even a little snapshot of some things to come. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about me. That introduction was very nice, just to kind of give you some background, but I started out as a teacher and I loved every second of it. I taught high school English at multiple levels and found that students taught me much more than I expected to teach them too. So that experience gave me the opportunity to then serve adults. And that's a very different learning experience too, from going from teaching students to also working with adults. So I have learned that service has to be at the heart of all that we do. And even in a recent talk that I did with AICs, I told them that if they're not making someone's life easier, that they're not going to be respected and appreciated. And so I've always kind of thought that that's our goal in leadership positions. There's no real power in this besides really serving others and trying to make their lives easier or providing clarity. I was also an academy principal when we started the academies of Louisville. And so I really got to have autonomy after I was a teacher and then an academic instructional coach and then an assistant principal to run my own academy. And during that time, I became very familiar with career and technical education, which I believe wholeheartedly in, and giving our kids access and opportunity beyond the classroom, but also more importantly, keeping them engaged when they're in the classroom. And so when I became a middle school principal, I saw very clear deficits in access and opportunity for our students, whether it was their schedule or not enough teachers or just not any choice at all. And having worked at a school that was quite far away from the students that I served, I really worked to think of something that was aligned to the academies of Louisville at the middle school level to engage our students. And that was the creation of Explore. So when you heard Ms. Patrick talking about that, the idea was that most typically in our schools, the students that got to do robotics or the enrichment activities tended to be the advanced students, and they tended to be the ones with strong parental support that could come and drive them or do things after school. And so one of my goals was to create a schedule where our students could have choice and opportunity during the school day. If they wanted to do robotics and they wanted to do music, they could do it. And so that's kind of the origination of that. It's all based on access and equity. And so from there, I led at the middle school level higher, and this opportunity came about too. So through my experiences, my work with literacy, my work developing curriculum, my work developing programmatic access, with equity being the overarching goal, it's landed me here. And through my work with my doctorate and the experiences that I've had, I've really had to ask myself, why is school the way that it is? And if we're honest with ourselves, and a lot of people on here, some familiar faces have heard me say this many times, we have to understand that there was intentionality in the way that school was created. And as much as we try to fight that, if we don't change bigger systems and structures, it's very difficult, and it ends up feeling like the definition of insanity. So in the 1800s, a group of white men, the Committee of 10, got together and determined what education would look like from that point on. And so that group, early NEA, or National Education Association, while well-intended, has created the structures that we see now. So the classes that we offer, even that factory model of education that we see, even the design of our schools in many ways. And so I find that my role is often to question those things, to work within the confines of law, but also to push to see where we can be creative, where we can change things to make those changes necessary for all students, because we know that their original creation was not for all. And so that's really led me to a lot of the work that I've done today. And I want to share, since I have the chance and the platform, my beliefs on learning so that you know who I am. I believe students learn best in a safe and well-resourced environment. I believe that meeting social and emotional needs of children supports their ability to learn. I have led a school pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and after it. And I can just tell you, whether we want to admit it or not, it's a different feel, whether it's the students, what they've been through trauma-wise, whether it's just the world and what we see. Oftentimes we become numb to that, but our adults also have a heavy load, and sometimes their tolerance and ability to handle the things that we're seeing changes too. So that's important. Students deserve equitable access to opportunities regardless of school, where they are. They should have the same opportunities and resources. Educators should be treated and respected as professionals. We are in a professional organization, and we must do that. Sometimes we do ourselves a disservice. Scientific research and practitioner experience lend itself to strong decision-making. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but we are in a field that is a science, and we have to continue to learn and grow, but also trust what we know as experts. Literacy is foundation of student achievement and future success. Student empowerment through design thinking, and you can kind of see the design thinking process behind me, lends itself to authentic engagement, hooking our kids in class, helping them see the why, then creating and aligning that to skills and assessments, which allows them to launch authentic products. The process of learning and meaningful feedback should be our focus, not arbitrary grades, that we really want to measure how our kids are learning and progressing. And then deeper learning with a focus on depth, not breadth, should be valued at every grade level. We want our kids to be content knowledge experts. We don't need them to know snapshots of every little thing. Instead, we want them to know enough to apply it in a real world way. And so it just leaves me to my thesis. The outdated industrial model of education is inadequate for every learner, and that brings us to where we are as a society and a world and as educators to make big changes. So let's talk literacy. Foundational skills being the missing piece. I am a researcher by practice, and I am an educator by practitioner. So I will just tell you, one of the things I started with was, let's think the big five. And so Ms. Patrick and I were even talking through the big five and just making sure, if you know this, great. If you don't, I just wanted to provide some context for you. So the big five when it comes to literacy, you've got phonemic awareness, right? It's understanding how parts of sound work together and combine to create syllables and words, and students can manipulate those to change those words. Phonics is that relationship between letters and sound. So a student who's strong in phonics can then sound out and spell those words. Fluency is then our ability to read and accurately master that through decoding. Vocabulary, the amount of words that we're reading, the larger a student's vocabulary, the easier it is for them to derive meaning from text, which is often a problem we see in our higher grade levels as text complexity rises. And then comprehension, the ultimate goal that I'm reading something that I then understand and can apply or explain or write about or do a presentation. Comprehension is the ultimate goal, but you have to have those first two as building blocks to even go beyond that. And that's kind of what we've found nationwide right now, you'll see, is a hot topic when it comes to literacy. So when we looked at NAACP, which is an educational assessment done at the national level, we saw that less than 30% of JCPS fourth graders were performing at or above those proficiency thresholds. Now, that sounds scary sometimes, but then when you look at that compared with other large districts nationwide, that is actually pretty similar to what we're seeing nationwide. And then with KSA, 38%, and KSA is our Kentucky Summative Assessment, so the state testing that you hear about, 38% of JCPS third graders scored proficient or distinguished. That's 7% below state. But if you look at 10th grade, we're performing near state average. So there's pockets of good, but there's obviously room for growth, whether it's in JCPS or just nationwide. And so it causes us to take kind of a bigger look at where our focus has been. And what I asked for when I worked with the research department and really thinking through our data and creating a brief that we can then use is data from MAP suggests that students who did not master foundational literacy skills by the end of second grade, for those kids, their chance to improve that really became scant. So we could do all the reading training we wanted to beyond that point, but if they didn't have those foundational skills by the end of second grade, it leaves us with holes going forward that are very difficult to make up. And so what implications does that have for teaching? The first thing I want to say is reading is a science. It's not magic. The way that our eyes go across a page and look at words and create meaning from them, the way that our brain interprets that, it is science. Education is science, like I said. And so we as educators oftentimes get ourselves into situations where people say, why are things changing? You're always changing something. We don't question medical science. We change things all the time. When we learn more, we do better. So education's ever evolving. We must stay on top of that. And if we know reading and we have research for it, we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that, minding the fact that we are experts in our fields and can apply practitioner knowledge to that. So research is great. You can be the best researcher you want, but if you've never experienced it and done it in the field, research is only half of that. And we need to be reminded of that sometimes as a community, that our educators and our practitioners, if you've been in a classroom, that's experience that people outside can never get. Foundational skills matter. Without phonemic awareness and phonics, reading can't sustain higher level text. If you look across the nation, you'll oftentimes see a dip after fourth grade as text complexity increases. If kids didn't learn how to put sounds together, if they did not get exposed to content knowledge vocabulary at increasing levels, you'll find that when text complexity increases, their reading comprehension decreases because they didn't have what they needed to truly understand what they were reading. And so the final implication is that tier 1 curriculum should be knowledge building. We can't do drill and kill. We have to make sure that once we've built foundational knowledge, that we're also building knowledge for content as well, to expose students to what they need to be content experts. So the implication for reading instruction is that expanding students' background knowledge and enriching their reading experiences across different disciplines and genres should be an integral part of a comprehensive reading program. But tier one instruction means all get it. all get this, and oftentimes we forget how important that is to have strong tier 1 instruction. So for those of you not familiar, tier 1 is universal. That means I'm approaching this when I walk into the classroom for the first time. I know that I have high quality resources for all of my students. I'm not walking in with the perception that they're going to fail, or I'm not taking this from an intervention perspective. A long time, and this is not just JCPS, we have focused so much on intervention. And because of that, we've become kind of an intervention district. We know how to meet the needs of multiple kids when they are tier 2 or tier 3. But what if we take a step back, and what we're looking at now with research aligned to KDE, aligned to national standards, that if we have strong tier 1, high quality instructional resources to start, it limits the needs for those next steps. And that way tier 2 can really be designed for that 5 or 15% of kids, where tier 1 can be designed for the majority of them. So the problem and steps to a solution. JCPS is currently lacking an updated K through 12 literacy plan. I can tell you it's coming. We're lacking a consistent foundational literacy experience for kids. And I say that, and to the educators on this call, I have been to as many elementary schools as I can in just the past few months. My goal was to hear and see, and I can tell you that although we haven't had a consistent approach, there are schools doing some amazing things, but they've had to find those on their own. And I'm thankful now that we're taking a step to say we can do this holistically. And then we're lacking that tier 1 core ELA curriculum, but we will have that now. And so when we look at our NAACP data for partner schools who are excelling, one thing that we noticed was they all had a tier 1 core ELA curriculum, which leads me to our curriculum selection and how we ended up here. And I'm gonna give you a brief overview, but I wanna make sure that we know what curriculum is, because there's a lot of people that think that they know curriculum, or they think that something is a tier 1, but it's really an intervention. And we have to be very careful that we know the difference. So curriculum is comprehensive academic content that progresses through a series of learning goals connected to grade level standards. And what that means is if you are someone that's maybe written a lesson, that's not necessarily curriculum. And a lot of people might think that they've written it, but it's the comprehensive part where you're working towards a final goal and those resources are all aligned. And so we know that effective curriculum provides clarity, it aligns to standards, it provides flexibility and structure, it allows for backwards planning, diverse perspectives and equity, a variety of learning needs, and then collaboration and agency. And so what Senate Bill 1 did was it allowed the superintendent to determine curricular choice for the entire district. And it has been a process where we have taken time to be very thoughtful and ensure that we have listened to stakeholders to get to the point where we've made a selection as a team. But I want to tell you what that looks like. So to do this, we had stakeholder voice. So we call those 50-50 committees. So with the district and JCTA, we identified core beliefs, core values, and standards alignment. And we did student feedback as well from principals and teachers. That 50-50 committee was represented with people from diversity, equity, poverty, exceptional child education, English as a second language, middle, elementary, principals, teachers, district resources, and people that had combined hundreds of years of experience to do this. And then our student stakeholders as well, we did groups with them to learn from those who were already doing some of these different curricular programs, and then principals and teachers too. We reviewed it. We looked at the specialists, we looked at the data, we had vendor presentations, and we also used the racial equity analysis protocol to determine that we were really meeting the needs of our students. So after that, we did curriculum recommendation and did a consultation process where we met with cabinet members, assistant superintendents, EAs, principals. We had open SBDM meetings at each school, teachers, parents, students, and then community organizations, feedback and presentations. And that's kind of part of you all being here today too. Then we're having an implementation period where I want to make sure that we're hearing from those who have done it and those who haven't, so that I can answer every question. I can tell you there are people that wanted this decision months ago, but we have made sure that we've gotten the appropriate feedback that we need to do this the right way. And some of you have asked, well, what about the choice zone? I heard about the choice zone. How does that play a role in this? So before Senate Bill 1, the choice zone committee was challenged by the board to ensure that they had curriculum selected. So they started this process prior to that, almost a year ago, where they were working to kind of vet resources and talk as a team. And so the choice zone, you also might have thought of them as your dual resides. One of my concerns taking this role was I didn't want the choice zone to say, we're going to do this, and then the district choose something else, right? Because in my opinion, if it's good enough for the district, it's good enough for the choice zone. If it's good enough for the choice zone, it's great for the district. And thankfully, through a very thorough process, they landed on the same thing. And so EL, or expeditionary learning, was chosen because of its commitment to equity, its knowledge building curriculum, its foundational skills. For the first time, we're going to have foundational skills across the board, K through 2, for our students. And then EL's value of the learner profile. So I know that that is a brief snapshot, but I hope you can hear the true thoughtfulness of the process and the tedious nature at which we arrived at it. But I will say this one thing before I move on. And I've communicated this to teachers too, and I will communicate this going on. We're not an EL district, and we don't hang our hats on a program or curriculum. What we do is we follow standards, we deconstruct them, and we follow best practices that are aligned to the research and beliefs that we just discussed when it comes to literacy. We are ELA teachers using a curriculum to better our students. And so I'm not gonna-
I want you to turn and talk to your neighbor.
I'm not gonna play this for you right now, but I have a whole video to kind of show you how we arrived at it. So I'm gonna send that to Mr. Brandon, and he can share that with you guys in the chat when we get done. But you'll get to hear from teachers and students, and not just me up here talking, to actually see it in action. In terms of racial equity and curriculum work, Dr. Marshall and his office and I have combined to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our students in a very intentional way. We're using Goldie Muhammad's framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy, and I'm very excited. There are a lot of people even on this call right now that are working every single day to realign our curriculum frameworks. We are working on a book study. We don't want this to seem separate, right? Because racial equity is academics, it's education, it's what we do. We're one and the same. And I also tell people oftentimes, don't rely on others to educate you when it comes to racial equity. We have to take ownership of our work and our role in that. And I believe that wholeheartedly. So this framework that we're utilizing really is to emphasize that identity, skills, intellect, criticality, and joy are the essential things we're looking for, not just in diversity, equity, and poverty, but in academics, in the classroom every single day, in your lessons. It's simple, it's easy to think through, but when you get down to the heart of it, it really is the essential work. And I just wanted to emphasize that we are working to ensure that that's aligned and clear for both our kids and our educators. So exciting things on the horizon as I wrap up that I wanted to share. Model teacher pathway. For a long time, we have only, because we were following interventions, a lot of times we've created these positions that allow someone to leave the classroom because they feel like that's their next step. I think we have not done the best job, and this is just not in JCPS, but nationwide, in finding ways to retain teachers by creating internal pathways that reward them financially and through leadership. And so I'm not going to give too much away, but my goal is to make sure our teachers know how appreciated they are and to utilize and pay them for their services by staying in the classroom. Classroom environment. I am a big believer that environment matters. If you had me as a teacher, I always had lamps. I had natural sunlight. I had colorful classrooms. Even today, if you walk in my office, I will never have a fluorescent light on. Some of that stuff matters. And so just really rethinking the spaces for our kids. We're creating flexible seating cohorts where teachers are going to get to redesign their classroom spaces. All of that matters. Rethinking grades and progress monitoring, just ensuring that where we say a kid is really where they are. that they're not getting arbitrary grades, that we're really rethinking as a district at the way that we communicate to parents and families. This is where your kid is. This is where they're progressing. I don't always know what a C means, right? I don't always know what a D or even a B means sometimes. So just really rethinking that we have clarity and that what we're saying your kid is doing is truly represented in the grade that they receive. And then the backpack of success skills, ensuring that our kids are leaving at each grade level with the skills they need to be successful in the real world. And so we're kind of revamping that and ensuring that that is aligned in the ways that we need it to. So what's to come is consistent curriculum implemented and supported across all schools, best practices for literacy, foundational skills K through 2, vibrant classrooms, and teachers staying in the classroom and finding ways to reward them for their service. And I would just end by saying small changes lead to big results. None of this happens overnight. And a lot of this is the first time we've done it. So there will be a lot of people that are looking for, well, it's not done yet, or you're not there yet. And we can't have that mentality. And so if there's one thing I would ask from this group is that, yes, accountability, I will take it. Hold me accountable, hold others accountable, but also understand the constraints and what time is needed to truly enact change when we've implemented the right things. So thank you, guys.
Patrick, you're on mute.
Now we're going to turn the next segment over to Ms. Thompson.
All right, I'm sorry, I was waiting to be unmuted. Let me go ahead and restart this very quickly. I thank you again for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to Dr. Marshall, to Dr. Greenwell. I believe Ms. Dillard is out there, Mr. Burba, and Mr. Ian for allowing me to be here today to talk about gifted and talented. So let me go ahead and get back to the beginning. So I will be discussing some aspects regarding gifted and talented in JCPS. So first things first, in the state of Kentucky and even in the nation, when we think about our gifted and talented students, we're thinking about our exceptional learners. This is why we also fall under the ECE umbrella in the state of Kentucky, because our students as gifted students are exceptional learners. They either possess and or demonstrate the exceptional ability in the 5 areas of giftedness. And the 5 areas of giftedness are general intellectual aptitude, specific academic aptitude, creative or divergent thinking, psychosocial or leadership skills, and or visual or performing arts. So that is again why we fall under the ECE umbrella in the state of Kentucky, because our students are also exceptional students, and they do require modifications to the core standards, to the curriculum, to their work in the school setting. Here is NAACP's, the National Association for Gifted Children's definition of giftedness. You can see it is very similar to the state of Kentucky. And again, when we think about our gifted students, we are thinking that they need modifications to their educational experiences in order for them to reach that potential and to make sure that the excellence gap is being closed for those students. Thinking back to what what Dr. Greenwell just said, all of our students have social emotional needs, and our gifted students are not exempt from that. They have different social emotional needs at times, but they also have social emotional needs along with their academic needs. In JCPS, we do have 2 separate programs. We have the state regulated gifted and talented program, which again falls under ECE. And then we also have the JCPS advanced program, which is specific to JCPS. It is not state regulated. It is also different than College Board advanced placement for our high school students. So here in JCPS, we do have the state regulated gifted and talented. Again, those are our exceptional students. They are possessing and or demonstrating that exceptional ability compared to their peers. And in the JCPS advanced program, this is a program for our academic high achievers. So those students who are performing high, but not exceptional in those academic areas. So here is just a quick screenshot of how they are different. Again, one of the main differences, JCPS advanced program is not state regulated, therefore it does not fall under ECE. However, gifted and talented is, and it does fall under ECE. So with gifted and talented, there are 5 areas. Gifted and talented identification in the state of Kentucky begins in 4th grade. So 4th through 12th graders are formally identified in one or more of these 5 areas of giftedness. When students are in K through 3, they are in what's called primary talent pool, which is to help foster those natural abilities so that they can potentially be identified starting in 4th grade. Again, there are 5 areas in the state of Kentucky. A student can be identified in one or more than one area, depending on if they meet that criteria. Even though the criteria for each area is different, the one thing that is common that you will see is you must have at least 3 pieces of evidence to show exceptional ability. In some of the areas like general intellect and specific academic, you do have a required test score. We've recently switched to the NAACP, the Naglieri Nonverbal Ability Test. Previously, we had used the COGAT, but we did make the switch to the NAACP because research shows it is a more equitable test. For specific academic, for math and ELA, we already give MAP as a district, and since that is a norm reference test, we are able to utilize that under the specific academic. In visual and performing arts, you'll see that there is an asterisk next to documentation of performance. This is a required piece of evidence, and we train the schools on what that documentation of performance could be for those students. We have also developed district-wide universal screeners for the 3 areas of creativity, leadership, and visual performing arts. Per our state regulation, district-wide screeners are required. For general intellect, again, we have the Naglieri, and for specific academic, we have MAP. So we used a lot of research. We looked at what other districts were doing, and we modified their screeners to match our screeners for our district to make sure that we do have those universal screeners for those non-academic areas. When we think about GT identification, you have school responsibilities and you have district responsibilities. It is the school's responsibility to administer those universal screeners, again, because that is what is required by the regulation. It is also the school's responsibility to gather those 3 pieces of evidence. They can have more than 3 pieces of evidence, but they must have at least 3 pieces of evidence that show that exceptional ability. And again, it can be the actual performance of it, or it can be that they have the ability and they're just showing it in a different way. Schools are also responsible for assuring equitable identification. That is where our department comes in. We have trained schools on establishing building norms on how to use those universal screeners and making sure that they're looking at any and all of their students for potential identification in the area of giftedness. And the last school responsibility when it comes to identification is to hold placement and committee meetings. That is when a group of individuals get together, look at the evidence that is being presented on each student, and verify that that is exceptional work for that student, and that student would qualify under the state regulation in the area of giftedness. On this district side, this is where my office comes in. One of the district responsibilities, again, is to ensure equitable identification practices. That is, again, why we brought the NAACP on board and why we have developed those universal screeners. We have also developed district-wide procedures, which we have produced a new book, and that was sent out to schools this past fall, laying out the identification procedures for each of those 5 areas, as well as primary talent pool. We also do provide trainings to schools. Some of them are whole district, like our Gifted Institute each summer. Some of them might be in small cohorts, but our most impactful and our most powerful trainings have actually been going out to the schools and meeting with them one-on-one so we can specifically tailor our knowledge and what they're doing to identifying those students. And then the last is we do have gifted itinerant teachers that do serve throughout the district. We were fortunate enough to have our gifted state grant increased this previous year. So we are going to go from 4 gifted itinerant teachers to 9 gifted itinerant teachers. Each one of them will be assigned to a zone, and they will be supporting 3 schools. And they will receive 3 new schools each year so that we can make sure that all students and staff are receiving that support. Now we need to talk about the characteristics. And I always say this quote, and poor Mr. Berber heard me say it whenever I presented it another time. If you've seen a gifted kid, you've seen one gifted kid. It's just like with any child out there. No 2 children are alike. The same as with our gifted students. No 2 gifted students are alike. Historically, we have thought of gifted students in one light, in one way, but we know now as a nation that that is no longer the case. Our gifted students show characteristics in many different ways. So when we look at these different characteristics, again, these are not every gifted child you would find out there. These are just some common characteristics that you might see in the area of cognitive ability, in the area of creativity. I did also include the affective characteristics because, again, as Dr. Greenwell said, and as I truly believe, we need to make sure that we're fostering that social emotional side. So our gifted students can have different affective characteristics than some of their general peers. There's also behavioral characteristics. And some of those can be cast in more of a negative light. But again, that's their way of expressing themselves. So we need to look at the child holistically and need to understand that there are many characteristics that describe a gifted child. And I can't just throw up, okay, in general intellect, you're always going to see these characteristics because that's not the case. You might see some of the characteristics, but you might also see some of the behavioral characteristics with our general intellectual students. You will have access to this slide deck, and down at the bottom, I did link one of my favorite documents to use with schools is called Varied Faces of GT. It will take your traditional gifted characteristics and it will then compare those characteristics and highlight characteristics of students of poverty, of students of color, of EL students, of ECE students, so that you can see that even though they might have the other side of the bell curve, they are showing some of those gifted characteristics and they do need to be recognized and fostered for those students. Now moving on to why gifted and talented. In other words, why should a student be found as gifted and talented if they are those exceptional learners? So I used this quote from NAACP. We need to challenge them. They need that acceleration. They need that enrichment, again, to make that continuous progress. When we think about our high achievers, when we think about our gifted students, yes, they're understanding the core content, or yes, they're exceptional leaders, but what are they doing to progress? Again, how are we reducing and eliminating that excellence gap? How are we making sure that they are continually having those experiences in their day-to-day classroom? Some of the reasons why a student is going to benefit, not just for the academic side, but they get those positive influences and they are then nurturing those interests and that creative work, which is going to help them in the long run. Our students, we all know this, are our future. So we need to make sure that they're receiving those skills and those abilities that are going to further it, because as Dr. Greenwell said previously, our nation, our world is entirely different than it was when we went to school. It's different than even at times when my senior in high school went to school. So we need to continue to grow with that, and we need to ensure that our students are continuing to grow with that. Being gifted and being able to be and talk with other gifted students helps build their self-esteem and their resiliency. A lot of the times, things are going to come easy to those students in the beginning, but then when they face the challenge, How are they going to deal with that challenge? How are they going to build that resiliency? I did also link in here NAACP's Gifted Bill of Rights. It's basically telling the students that they have the right to further their education. They have the right to collaborate with like-minded peers. They have that right to have that education fostered for them and to lessen that excellence gap that we are seeing with our gifted students. So now we can move on. How can you be an advocate? I know we have both community members and teachers and school members here. So I have linked various avenues for you to advocate. One thing, since I took this position in 2002, is I wanted a way to get information out in multiple avenues. So for our families, we have created a gifted site specific for our families. We've also listed some parent tip sheets. As a parent of a gifted child, there are times when they can be challenging. So those tip sheets can help you work through that. And it also has tips on how you can advocate for your child, both in school and out of school. We are partnered with CAGE, the Kentucky Association for Gifted Education. They are also partnered with WKU. They have quite a few different ways that you can be an advocate on the CAGE site. We don't have time for it, but I love the video. Let's do it. Again, it's talking about how parents and families can advocate for their gifted students. And again, I threw the NAACP Gifted Bill of Rights in there on both sides, because again, that's going to help you be an advocate for your student. On the school side, to make sure that information is being sent out in multiple avenues, we have also created a gifted site specific for our schools. We have a gifted Google folder, which you must have a JCPS account to enter it, but it has all of our policies, procedures when it comes to identifying in those 5 areas, as well as primary talent pool. It has the universal screeners there. It has documents there that they might need to help collect evidence. It has advice on what pieces of evidence you might want to collect for your gifted students. We also, I've mentioned before, have our Summer Institute each year. We are having it again this year. Look for it on Vector starting in May. It will be in July and it will be virtual. We have 2 packed days of opportunities for you to learn about identification, as well as providing those direct services for your students once they are actually identified. We also chose to start a Google Classroom because, again, we wanted various ways. Some people prefer the Google folder, some people prefer the Google site, some people prefer the classroom. So we wanted to make sure we were disseminating that information in a multitude of avenues. And again, I linked the NAACP Gifted Bill of Rights because as a school, as a teacher, that is how you can advocate for your gifted students. Now that we've identified the students, we need to provide that direct service. Regulation says we must provide at least 2 service delivery options. So as a district, we decided that we needed to provide some resources for our schools. These are, of course, not the end all be all. These are supplements to that core curriculum if they are needed for that gifted students. These resources were sent out back in May of 2021 to schools. They did receive these various resources. So on this slide, you'll see what elementary was sent back in May. We did send them for the specific academic areas. We are currently actually working on student books for VPA, creativity, general intellect, and leadership that we will be rolling out at the Institute to again use as a supplement for our gifted students. Middle school was sent these titles of books. Again, these are a supplement. They are a resource. They are not meant to replace the core curriculum. They are meant to enrich and enhance and provide that differentiation for students. And in high school, they were sent these differentiating instruction with menu books. We also recently purchased and are currently getting in our supply of William and Mary Gifted Language Arts units that are specific for high school. Those hopefully will be sent out to schools before the end of this school year so that they have them in place for next year. So I want to thank everyone for listening to the presentation. And if you do have any questions, I did include my email and our office phone number. We are also on Twitter. So if you ever want to tweet on Twitter about Gifted, or if you want to follow the JCPS Twitter account, because again, we share quite a bit of information on that site also.
I want to thank you both for sharing that vital information with us this evening. Now we move into the portion of the session, the community forum, where we have our question and answer period. This is a 20-minute period, and to avoid talking over each other, we asked you to put your questions in the chat. Ian or I will read your questions, and that's how we will get the information flowing. I thank you for your participations as we go through this process. Mr. Brandon, would you start with the first question, please?
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. The first question I have is, what are the different levels of education offered in JCPS, and how does the curriculum differ within these levels?
So the different levels that are in JCPS is we have comprehensive, ECE, which again is inclusive of gifted and talented, ESL, the JCPS Advanced Program, Honors, and College Board Advanced Placement. So I could speak on the curriculum regarding the advanced program and the gifted and talented. There is no set curriculum for the JCPS Advanced Program. And then for gifted, the curriculum standards for gifted and talented students are the same for all children. However, it is the pedagogical approach that teachers use differentiated instruction, enrichment, and/or acceleration opportunities that are varied for our gifted learners. For gifted and talented students, various resources, again, have been sent to the school, as well as resources available to check out from our department.
Is it possible for students to be serviced in more than one level at the same time? And if so, how does that work?
Yes, I can answer that, Jesse. Yes, it is possible. You can be an exceptional child. You can be ECE with a student with disabilities, but also be gifted and talented. I think that's very important, because I think that oftentimes that umbrella can cause a stigma, and we are really working hard to break that, because an exceptional child is exceptional in multiple ways, and we have to make sure that we're servicing that. In terms of curriculum and access, though, like Jesse said, it's not that the curriculum shifts, it's the pedagogical practices that shift based on those students' needs. So those texts, those supplementary texts that Jesse was showing, a lot of those are skills and strategies that you could apply to gifted learners, as opposed to redoing an entire curriculum.
Thank you. Again, let me reiterate, if you have a question, please put your question in the chat. We will not be acknowledging anybody on, just put your question in the chat and we will read your question, okay? Could you tell us, and after we got through talking about this, and I guess with gifted and talented, could you tell us what the racial makeup is of gifted and talented at this particular time? And are we happy with that makeup, or is it the district, is the district doing other things to improve that?
So our current racial makeup as of yesterday, when the numbers were run, is we are looking at 21.5% of our gifted students are African Americans, 9.2 are Asian, 9.8 Hispanic, 7.3 two or more races, and 52% white. So while we have made gains, we know that we still have more gains to make. So I would never say that we're happy with those numbers. I want to make sure that all students who should be identified as gifted are being identified as gifted.
Thank you. I want to ask you something that you said about at the local school gathering evidence. This came out of your presentation, and I need to ask you that. I want to know at the local school, who exactly gathers the evidence and what does the evidence consist of?
So at the local school, each school by state law is required to have a gifted and talented placement and selection committee. Each school also has what's called a GT lead. The GT lead is the spearhead of that committee. So they are the ones that start the collection of the evidence. The teachers are involved in the collecting of the evidence. There are multiple pieces of evidence that can be collected. For me to list them all would take probably the rest of our session, but some of them, it does deal with teacher input. It can be student work samples. It can be a portfolio. It can be parent input. So there are a multitude of avenues for schools in order to collect that evidence. And then that committee meets and decides, again, is that evidence exceptional?
Okay. I have another one and because of your presentation, it just hit me with something. You said that you all have GT itineraries, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And now those itineraries, do they, from what I'm gathering, are there limited number of schools that have gifted and talented in them? And is that the reason why y'all service such a few, the district service such a few?
So we do have our gifted and talented itinerant teachers, and they do support 3 schools each week, and they have those 3 schools or all year. So due to the number of itinerant teachers, we are not able to put one in each school. It would be fantastic if we had the state funding for that, but we just don't have the state funding for that. So we have built a model to where they provide that direct service, and they actually coach their schools on providing that direct service. And then the next year they receive once a month support in order to further that, but they do receive 3 new schools because we do want to make sure that all of our schools and all of our students do have that opportunity. So again, if we had the state funding for me to put 150 gifted teachers out there, I would absolutely love to do that. But we know that we do not have the state funding for that, but we were fortunate to get it increased to now have 9 itinerant teachers versus the 4 that we've had previously.
So you service to all schools in Jefferson County, elementary, middle, and high. I want to make sure I got that in my head.
So with the
Okay.
new model, with the increase in our gifted numbers, yes, ma'am, we will have an itinerant teacher that is specific for middle school. We will have an itinerant teacher specific for high school. We will have an itinerant teacher that is specific for middle/high school AIS schools, for our alternative schools, for our elementary AIS schools, and our 3 elementary zones.
Ian, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. How will high schools increase the gifted and talented numbers, especially for Black students that were never identified in middle or elementary school?
So there are the 5 areas of gifted. So they can be found eligible in any of those 5 areas. We have again moved to the Naglieri. We are working on which grade levels next year will receive that standardized, I shouldn't say standardized, universal screening in regards to that. MAP is what's used primarily, but in high school, we know that they do take some other norm referenced assessments. So those alternative norm referenced assessments like SAT 10, SAT, ACT, some of those can also be used for identification. But that is one of the reasons why we wanted to get an itinerant teacher specific for high school, is to support our high schools.
And how has the new legislation impacted your work, and will belonging for the LGBTQ plus and students of color be honored in new lessons and lesson plans expected by the principals?
So the law in itself, we're working on a policy to ensure that we're meeting the law. We have to ensure that we honor that. However, There are ethics guidelines that we also have to meet for our students to ensure that they feel a sense of belonging and included in the process. So we are walking the line to ensure that we're both meeting the law, but also including the needs of our students. And I think that we're working towards a policy that will do that. We've worked too long and too hard for that work to move backwards.
And the next question I have is in regards to literacy and math. Is it yourself, Dr. Greenwell, or Chief Moore that is responsible for principals making sure that literacy and math is implemented in every school?
So the way that I kind of differentiate between Chief Moore, who's the chief of schools, he's over the principals directly and the monitoring of that is if we create the plan and the resources and those supports, the monitoring of that in terms of implementation and success would come back to the actual school leader through Chief Moore.
I have a question for you, Dr. Greenwell. When do you plan to unveil the literacy program that will be used for the district?
So
Is that a secret? Is that top secret?
No, not. So I think that when we say literacy program, we're working to do a K through 12 literacy plan that really looks at best practices from kindergarten up, because literacy, people sometimes get confused and think literacy is English or literacy is ELA when it's really interdisciplinary, right? And so we're working on a literacy plan, but we want to do it right. And so we're looking at plans that are national models. I actually met today with the crew that's working on it with me. So it's one of those things where we're going to do research best practices, put it together, gain feedback to ensure that we're on the right track. And then I view it as almost an open book, like here is JCPS literacy that we could show for parents, families, community, that there is no secret, right? This is what we're doing now. And then in terms of curriculum and literacy being tied to curriculum, I think that in the next few weeks, principals will have a clear plan, at least K through 8, especially where we're headed with those foundational skills, and then looking at the curriculum choice for ELA. So just two different things there, but both coming.
The next question I have, and I said, what are the district's successful reading programs in hand right now? And what data is being used to determine its effectiveness?
So right now when we did a poll, right, there was almost 150 different curricula being used because there was no mandate to have anything consistent. So when you ask which ones, it's so many. So our schools were really trying to do what they felt was best, what they felt was good. And a lot of them have done well, but some of them I know needed some consistency or were looking for some support. So as we move towards that tier 1 approach for ELA, we'll be able to, from a service delivery model, make sure that we're providing consistent support, but also we'll know what our consistent look-fors are, and then a comprehensive approach to monitoring and success. The good news is when we're talking about EL, which is the expeditionary learning, a lot of our schools were already using it. So we could look at map data, and we could also look at the ones that we're using, without getting too technical, the ones that we're using the components that were the foundational components called skills block. We looked at map data from winter to winter, and we're seeing steady progress from that already, even without us having a district-wide training. So we're also adding a diagnostic for fluency as well to help screen students early on to understand where they are in terms of their literacy and language attainment.
Well, these assessments that you're speaking of, are they going to be given every 6 weeks or every 4 weeks? Okay.
Yeah, no, we already give MAP in the fall and the winter and the spring.
Okay. Ian, I turn it back over to you.
This question just came in. As a parent with 2 very different children, one ECE and the other gifted, Should I be more focused on the curriculum or the lesson plan? The lessons that my gifted child gets are not impressive, but the resources and curriculum my ECE child receives are very good.
Jesse, I can answer the first part of that and then I'll let you go. Whoever this parent is, I'm in the same boat with you, and I've kind of shared, I have my older son, he's ahead of the game in a lot of ways, he's gifted. My younger son struggles with decoding already, and we're in speech therapy and just different things like that. So coming from that perspective, I would say we're dealing with human beings, and your teachers are human beings too. So that sounds like there might be some discussions being had with the pedagogical approach to it. I think that it's important to look at the curriculum, but I also think it's important to look at what they're being asked to do, more importantly, and how they're being asked to demonstrate it. So for example, I've seen oftentimes in the past, we might say our ECE kids need to learn this and have a vocab and almost like drill and kill, whereas gifted kids might get this cool experience. And so we're really trying to shift away from that kind of a notion. So Jesse, I'll let you kind of piggyback on that.
I completely agree, Dr. Greenwell. It is more about the experiences that they're receiving and how they're being able to show what they've obtained in order for them to show their knowledge. So I wouldn't highlight on that curriculum. Again, the resources that we have are there as a supplement. I'm not telling you to pick up the book and teach straight from it. But there are some alternatives. There's some differentiation that can come from those resources that while they're working on a core standard, it might go deeper into that standard. It might enrich that curriculum at that opportunity. So I completely agree with Dr. Greenwell is to have those conversations, because we are all in this together. We are all trying to further our children's education. So having that meaningful conversation and just ask, and even asking the kiddo, hey, what did you do today? What did you learn today? What made you smile today? What challenged you today? Having those conversations with them and then relaying that with the teacher and having those honest conversations.
Ian, do you have a question, or is
Yep.
it? Okay.
Also from the chat as well. In separate meetings, I've heard Dr. John Marshall and Mr. Delquan Dorsey share that you're using the ARE tool and the empty. What are they, and how are teachers or principals to use them? Can we as parents receive copies, or are they online?
Ian, do you want me to answer that? So,
Yes, thank you.
okay, yeah, I'm happy to. So Dr. Marshall is the chief of our diversity, equity, and poverty, and they have created two tools, the R tool, affirming racial equity, and then the empty, I can tell you what it stands for, I just need to look it up. And I can tell you what both of them do. So both of them are used as tools to ensure that we're aligning racial equity in the way that we both lead as a leader and in the curricular choices we make. So if I were using the R tool, one of the things would be content integration and looking at how myself as a teacher took into account my own bias in the creation of it, or looking at materials in that way. The empty, which is a comprehensive portfolio of your equity monitoring progress tool. Thank you, just came to me. Thank you. And then that is like a portfolio. So me as a leader, when I was a principal, the empty was the place where I would put all of the evidence of the things that we were doing to make sure that we were meeting our racial equity plan goals. Those are not secrets. You should be able to have access to those. In fact, they're utilized in many ways, and many districts have reached out to learn more about those.
Patrick?
Yeah, I only have 2 more minutes, and I have a question. And this question is, being a new parent of a child entering your school district, what things do I need to do to help my child be ready for reading and literacy?
Oh, this is my favorite question. There are so many things that we can do, but I kind of put together a list, just thinking through, if you were a parent on here or a community member, what might stand out to you? Because we can't do it all. I mean, we're all living during a very busy time, so we don't need to beat ourselves up, but there's also some things we can do. We're following the Read to Succeed Act, and part of that is kind of a read at home plan for our families, which we're excited to talk about soon. But a sneak peek of that, if you are a parent, you want to try to build oral language at home. Talk to them, even from infancy, talk to your toddler, talk to your child. You might laugh sometimes, but speak to them like they're an adult. Have conversations with them. They pick up on that. Read to your child every day as much as you can, starting when they're infants up to now. Use sounds and songs and gestures when you're talking to them. They love rhyme. Children pick up on sounds and repetition, and they follow words and mouths. The way that we read, like I said, isn't magic. Language is inherent, but reading is not necessarily. Point out printed words. When you're in stores, when you're looking at menus, point that out, because like I said, the printed language part of that is something that's not necessarily inherent. We have to get to that point where we can understand that those words relate to sounds that we hear, and then understand how that can form fluency. And then take children's books, libraries, writing materials where you go, in the car, just different things that you might do if you went to wait in an office somewhere. Just have different things for them to do. And we all need to work on this, limiting screen time and emphasizing a quiet place where kids can read, having set time during the day that they can do that. That's just a snapshot, and we're kind of putting together a plan that I think will be easy for families to follow. But we always have books. We always have free access to that that we're willing to share at any point. So I encourage anyone on here, feel free to reach out, especially to our library media services. They have the hookup for anything that you might need. And our libraries around Louisville, they're special places, and I love to give them a shout out anytime I can, just to take your kids there for reading hours. Oftentimes there's playgrounds inside, and just a wonderful place to foster that for free.
I want to take this time, we've ran out of time right now, but I want to take this time to thank Dr. Greenwell and Ms. Thompson for sharing their expertise with us tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Ian so he can talk about May's form, and that will be the final form for the year.
Thank you, Ms. Patrick. And again, I want to thank our presenters for this information. Very, very, very useful and positive. So I want to reiterate some of the things in the chat. If you didn't get a chance to sign in, the sign-in link is in the chat, as well as the video Dr. Greenwell previewed at the beginning of her presentation, as well as the post-form survey. And just give you a heads up, our next and final forum for this year will be May 11th. The topic is parent orientation, and we will have Lavanya Jones, who's a counselor at Young Elementary School, Bailey Arnold, counselor at Mazik Middle School, and Dr. Jessica Benson, the counselor at Manual High School. And we will be covering how to provide parents with information on enrolling and navigating through JCPS district. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I will turn it back over to you, Ms. Patrick.
This concludes our forum for the night. I look forward to the next forum in May. Good night and be safe.